Under the relentless heat of the Texas sun, a restless herd of horses shifted uneasily across the auction grounds, their hooves kicking up dust that seemed to hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Among them stood one horse, distinct from the others, a black stallion, his coat glossy and sleek despite the grime that covered him. His white blaze ran like a lightning bolt down his face, a striking contrast against his dark fur. He didn't shy away or fidget nervously like the others. Instead, his eyes locked onto anyone who dared to approach, filled with an unsettling intensity. Standing at the edge of the crowd was Emily Carter, a woman whose heart was as big as her love for animals. Her rescue farm, Hope Haven, already housed a dozen animals, each with their own tragic story. But this stallion, this one made her pause. There was something in his eyes, a silent plea, or maybe a warning. Emily wasn't sure, but she couldn't ignore the pull in her chest. She had come here today looking for a few supplies, not another horse. But there was something about him, something she couldn't quite explain. She knew the risks, knew how the horses labeled trouble often carried more than just bad behavior. They were often victims of their pasts, broken by cruelty and neglect. She glanced at the man standing behind her, Jake Hollis, a regular at these auctions. He had a reputation for speaking his mind, often unsolicited. "That's one dangerous animal," he said, nodding toward the stallion. "Been passed from owner to owner, all of 'em giving up on him. He's a terror." Emily studied the stallion carefully, his movements tense, as if he was ready to bolt at any second. She had seen horses like him before. Misunderstood, mistreated, but still salvageable. "Where did he come from?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. Jake shrugged. "Came in with a group of others. No history, no papers." The man who dropped him off looked desperate to get rid of him. Emily's gaze fell to the scar running along the stallion's flank, a jagged line that didn't seem accidental. Jake leaned in closer, his voice dropping. "Some folks say he's cursed, but I think it's more than that. A horse with a mark like that, well, it's trouble. I wouldn't bother." Despite his warning, something deep inside Emily told her that this wasn't just about a horse with a bad attitude. She had seen enough animals to know that pain, fear, and neglect shaped them in ways that others couldn't understand. She couldn't leave him here, not like this. "Send him to my farm," she said suddenly, surprising even herself. "I'll take him." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're crazy. You know that? He'll just hurt you." Emily didn't respond, only raised her hand as the auctioneer began. She wasn't going to back down now. She couldn't. The stallion deserved a chance, and she was going to give it to him. The drive back to Hope Haven was filled with tension. The stallion kicked and snorted in the trailer, rattling the vehicle with every wild movement. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting the trailer door to burst open. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Her brother, Mark, was following her in his truck, hauling some supplies. The crackle of the CB radio broke the silence. "You sure about this one?" Mark's voice was filled with doubt. Emily's gaze remained on the road ahead. "I don't know, but I think he needs help. Whatever's going on with him, I want to figure it out." Mark didn't respond right away, but when he did, his voice softened. "Just don't do anything reckless, sis." At the ranch, the arrival of the stallion didn't go unnoticed. The other horses turned their heads, their ears swiveling in his direction. Emily backed the trailer into the paddock, opening the door with caution. Thunder, she had started calling him that, stormed down the ramp, his hooves pounding the earth with unrelenting force, his body tense with a raw energy that seemed to radiate off him. "You're safe now, Thunder," Emily whispered, but she knew he didn't believe her. Not yet. Not after everything he had been through. The first few days were difficult. Thunder refused to let anyone near him, retreating to the farthest corner of the paddock at the slightest approach. Every time Emily came closer, his eyes flashed with distrust, and he would stamp his hooves, his body wound tight like a spring ready to snap. But Emily was patient. She spent hours by the fence, reading aloud, singing softly, or simply sitting quietly. She knew that healing took time, especially for a horse with wounds deeper than anyone could see. One evening, as a storm rolled in, she stayed late in the barn. She noticed Thunder pacing frantically, his movements erratic. She felt a chill run through her as she thought about Jake's words. The scar. The curse. The wind picked up, howling through the paddock, and suddenly there was a loud crash, followed by Thunder's frantic whinny. Emily grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside, her heart pounding in her chest. Thunder was kicking at the gate, his eyes wide with panic. "Easy, boy," Emily called, holding her hands out, but Thunder wasn't listening. He was fixated on something that terrified him. His ears flicked toward the barn, where Emily's phone had begun playing a recording. The sound of a voice filled the air, recounting the horrors of illegal horse racing. Horses branded, beaten, and pushed beyond their limits. Emily's heart sank as she rushed to silence the phone. Thunder's frantic thrashing slowed, but his body still trembled with fear. "What did they do to you?" she whispered, her voice breaking as she stood in the rain, helpless against the storm. As the rain fell harder, Emily made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth, no matter how long it took. Whatever haunted Thunder's past, she would find out. As days passed, the tension between Emily and Thunder grew stronger. Emily was determined to earn the horse's trust, but Thunder's trauma ran deep. Every time she tried to approach, he backed away, his eyes filled with wariness. His erratic behavior was a constant reminder of his past, one that Emily had yet to fully uncover. Still, she persevered. Each visit, each quiet gesture, was another step in the long road of healing. Thunder's condition had begun to stabilize physically, but emotionally, he remained distant. Emily spent countless hours working with him. She introduced him to new routines, offering him hay and water with patience. Slowly, he started to respond, not with aggression, but with guarded curiosity. There were moments, brief but significant, when he allowed Emily to get close, when his eyes softened, and his body didn't stiffen at the sound of her footsteps. However, despite Emily's best efforts, she knew that the physical scars on Thunder's body weren't the only ones that needed healing. There was something deeper at play, a fear that wasn't just born from neglect or mistreatment. It was as if he had seen or experienced something that made him distrust not just people, but everything around him. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Thunder's story was far darker than she had imagined. One afternoon, as she was brushing him in the barn, Thunder's behavior became increasingly erratic. His ears pinned back, and he began pacing in tight circles. Emily's heart raced as she watched him, sensing that something was terribly wrong. She checked the barn's doors and windows, instinctively trying to pinpoint the cause of his distress. But nothing seemed out of place, until she heard it. A faint sound in the distance, the rumbling of an engine. Instinctively, Emily moved to the front of the barn, peering out from behind the corner. The sound grew louder, and soon enough, a black SUV came into view, its dark windows hiding the occupants from sight. Emily's stomach dropped as she watched it roll slowly down the dirt road that led toward Hope Haven. Thunder's panic was now palpable. He whinnied loudly, throwing his head up, and his hooves beat against the dirt floor. Emily tried to calm him, but it was clear he was frightened, terrified, even. She stepped back, her mind racing. Who were they? And why had they come here? She knew she had to act fast. Thunder wasn't just another horse. He was a symbol of something much larger, something hidden in the shadows. The note she had received a week earlier, the one threatening her to leave him alone, suddenly felt more real than ever. Whoever was after him wasn't going to stop. Emily didn't hesitate. She moved quickly, grabbing the phone from her pocket and dialing her brother. "Mark? Mark, they're here," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "I need you to get to the farm. Now." Mark's voice crackled on the other end. "What's going on?" "They're here for Thunder," Emily replied, her eyes still fixed on the approaching SUV. "I don't know who they are, but they're not leaving without him." As the SUV pulled up to the barn, Emily's instincts kicked in. She grabbed a large metal chain from the barn and quickly secured the door, locking it with a bolt. Thunder's frantic movements had only escalated, and the last thing Emily wanted was for him to hurt himself or escape in his panic. Through the barn's small window, she could see two men get out of the SUV. Both were tall, broad-shouldered and moved with purpose. They exchanged a few words before walking toward the barn, their eyes scanning the area. Emily's heart pounded as she ducked out of sight. She didn't know what they wanted, but it was clear that they weren't here for a friendly visit. Just then, her brother's truck pulled into the driveway, tires kicking up gravel as he parked behind the barn. He immediately hopped out, his face set with determination. Emily moved quickly to join him, and without a word, the two of them moved into position, ready to protect Thunder at all costs. As the men neared the barn, Emily stepped into view, her body tense. "You're trespassing," she said, her voice firm but calm. "You need to leave." One of the men smirked. "We're here for the horse. He's not yours to keep." Emily shook her head. "You're not taking him. Not today." The other man stepped forward, his face darkening. "You don't get to make the rules here." Emily's grip tightened around the chain, and she stood her ground. She didn't know who these men were, but she wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not when she had finally started to make progress with Thunder. Behind her, Mark made his presence known. He pulled out his phone, and within seconds, the sound of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance. Emily's heart skipped a beat, relief flooding through her. She had made the call. As the police arrived, the two men froze, their faces paling as they realized they were surrounded. They had underestimated her. They had underestimated the bond she had built with Thunder. Emily was ready for whatever came next, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The truth was out there, and Emily was more determined than ever to uncover it. The stakes were higher than she ever imagined, but as long as she had Thunder by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The night air was thick with tension as Emily stood face to face with the two men who had come for Thunder. The distant hum of sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of the police. But Emily knew that time was running out. The men's eyes narrowed, their muscles tensing as they assessed the situation. They had been caught off guard by the arrival of law enforcement, but they weren't ready to give up so easily. One of the men, the taller of the two, stepped forward, a malicious grin spreading across his face. "You don't understand, do you?" he sneered. "That horse belongs to people far more powerful than you. You're playing with fire." Emily's heart raced, but she stood her ground, her voice unwavering. "No, Thunder is mine now, and I won't let you take him. Not after everything we've been through." The other man, who had been standing silently, reached for something in his jacket, a weapon. Emily realized too late. Her pulse quickened as she stepped forward, instinctively placing herself between the men and Thunder, who was still in the barn, agitated but safe for now. Emily's mind was racing, thinking of her next move. The officers would be here soon, but it wasn't enough to just wait them out. The taller man's grin faltered for a moment, and Emily took advantage of the split second. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice colder, more determined than before. "I won't let you use him again. Thunder's not your property, and neither is my farm." Before the man could respond, a flash of movement from behind Emily caught her eye. Mark was behind the barn, signaling to her with a quick hand gesture. The plan was in motion. The officers were strategically positioned around the perimeter, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Do you really think you can protect him?" The first man spat, his hand tightening around his weapon. "You've already dug yourself into a hole. No one will believe you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the heat of the moment building, the threat of violence, the uncertainty of how it would all play out. But she knew she couldn't let fear take over. She wasn't alone this time. She had Mark, the police, and something even more powerful than any weapon: the truth. And then, just as the first man took a step forward, a sudden roar of sirens filled the night, followed by the sound of multiple police cars pulling up in a coordinated rush. The two men froze, realizing the trap had been sprung. The officers flooded the yard, their guns drawn and their voices commanding. "Freeze! Put your hands up!" The men looked around in panic, realizing their escape routes were blocked. The taller man cursed under his breath as his partner raised his hands in defeat, knowing they had no choice but to comply. Within seconds, both men were apprehended, their weapons confiscated, and they were pushed to the ground with handcuffs snapping into place. Emily exhaled in a slow, shaky breath, her legs trembling from the adrenaline that had coursed through her. She watched as the officers secured the men and led them to their vehicles, a sense of relief washing over her. The immediate danger had passed. Thunder was safe. But the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning of the war against the underground operation that had been exploiting horses like Thunder for years. As the officers started to inspect the black SUV, Emily felt her resolve strengthen. The men's presence wasn't just a random threat. It was part of a much larger network. They had come for Thunder because he was a key player in exposing the cruelty that had taken place under the radar for so long. This wasn't about a single horse. This was about taking down an entire criminal ring. A few moments later, one of the officers approached Emily, holding a bag of evidence. Inside were several documents and photographs, all linked to the underground racing circuit. The truth was out. The operation had been exposed. The corrupt owners, trainers, and gamblers who had trafficked horses for profit were now within reach, their operations unraveling piece by piece. Emily looked up at the barn where Thunder stood, watching the commotion from a distance. His eyes met hers, calm but knowing. The bond they had formed over the past few weeks had grown stronger with each passing day, and now, standing in the quiet aftermath of the chaos, Emily knew they had both won. Thunder wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a symbol of resilience, of survival. And together, they had brought down a network of cruelty. It was a victory, but one that came at a price. The work wasn't done yet, but Emily was ready to fight, to protect Thunder and ensure that no horse would ever have to endure what he had. As the police continued their investigation and the last of the men were taken away, Emily walked back to the barn, her heart heavy but proud. She stopped for a moment, resting a hand on Thunder's neck as he nuzzled her gently. The past would always be a part of him, but it didn't define him. And as long as Emily had breath in her lungs, she would make sure of that. Thunder was free now, free from his past, free from the people who had tried to break him. And Emily was ready to take the next step with him, together, as a team. The hardest part was over, but there was still more work to be done. And Emily knew that they were stronger together than they ever had been apart. In the days following the confrontation, the atmosphere at the ranch began to shift. The once tense air now felt lighter, filled with a sense of cautious relief. Emily spent hours in the barn, caring for Thunder, the horse who had not only survived the horrors of his past, but had also helped bring down an entire criminal network. The adrenaline from the night of the arrest was slowly wearing off, leaving behind a quiet but profound sense of accomplishment. Emily had always known that Thunder's journey to healing would be long, but now, more than ever, she felt a deep connection with him. The bond they had formed through their shared struggles was stronger than any barrier the world could throw at them. Thunder no longer flinched when she approached. He no longer shied away from her touch. In fact, he sought her out, his dark eyes filled with trust that had taken weeks to cultivate. The investigation into the underground racing circuit had begun in earnest, with law enforcement uncovering more damning evidence. The arrested men had provided critical information, leading to the dismantling of a larger network of horse traffickers, trainers, and gamblers who had profited off the suffering of animals like Thunder. Several arrests were made, and the operation's financial ties were traced back to high-profile individuals, some of whom were still in hiding. While Emily could see the progress being made, she also knew this was just the beginning. The trail of corruption ran deep, and even though the immediate threat had been neutralized, there were still many pieces of the puzzle to put together. The investigators worked tirelessly, poring over ledgers, documents, and photographs, slowly unraveling the web of deceit. Thunder's involvement had been pivotal, and his connection to the illegal circuit made him an unwitting hero, his past darkness now part of the light that exposed the truth. Mark, who had been a steadfast ally throughout the ordeal, continued to help Emily keep the ranch safe. He helped her monitor the surrounding area, ensuring that no more threats were looming in the shadows. They'd installed new security measures, including cameras and more robust fencing, just to be sure. While the immediate danger had passed, both of them knew that there were still people out there who would stop at nothing to reclaim Thunder, or to cover their tracks. Emily often thought back to the note she had found in the trailer, those ominous coordinates, the promise that this wasn't over. But as the days passed and the police gathered more evidence, the men behind the operation became more desperate. Emily held on to the hope that they would be caught before they could strike again. And, more importantly, she knew that Thunder would never be taken from her again. One quiet afternoon, as Emily stood by the fence watching Thunder graze in the pasture, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The storm had passed, but the scars of the past would always remain, not just for Thunder, but for herself as well. The weight of what they had both endured, and the cost of bringing those responsible to justice, was still present. But now, there was healing. Thunder was no longer the scared, broken animal that had stumbled into her life months ago. He was stronger, more confident, and, most importantly, free. Emily leaned against the fence, her hand resting on the smooth wood, as Thunder lifted his head to meet her gaze. She smiled softly, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. They had come so far together. Later that evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Emily sat down on the porch, a cup of tea warming her hands. Mark joined her, his usual quiet demeanor accompanied by a rare smile. "We did good, Em," he said, his voice calm but filled with an undeniable sense of accomplishment. "We did," Emily replied, her eyes never leaving Thunder, who was now peacefully grazing near the barn. "But Thunder did most of it. He's the one who led us to the truth." Mark nodded, his gaze following hers. "Yeah, but you gave him a chance. That's what matters." Emily took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill her lungs. The ranch had always been a place of healing, for both people and animals. Now, it had become a symbol of redemption, not just for Thunder, but for her as well. The battle had been hard, but the victory was sweet. They had fought for what was right, and together, they had made sure that Thunder's past would never define him. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle above, Emily stood up and walked toward the barn. Thunder's silhouette was framed by the soft glow of the porch light, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of the journey they had shared. There were still many challenges ahead, but for now, the storm had passed. The ranch was safe, and Thunder was finally free. "Come on, boy," Emily whispered, holding her hand out to Thunder. He trotted toward her, his steps light, his spirit unbroken. It was a new beginning, and for the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to believe that they had both found the peace they so desperately deserved. As the weeks passed, the storm clouds that had once loomed over Emily and Thunder began to fade. The ranch, once a place of uncertainty and fear, had transformed into a sanctuary of peace. Thunder, the horse who had endured so much, now stood as a symbol of resilience, his once wary eyes now reflecting trust and calm. Emily had given him the space to heal, the time to learn to trust again, and in return, he had taught her the true meaning of redemption. The investigation into the illegal racing circuit had brought justice, but it had also uncovered a deeper truth. The bond between humans and animals, when rooted in trust, could overcome the harshest of pasts. For Emily, this wasn't just about saving a horse. It was about restoring a soul, her own included. The courage she found in Thunder, and the strength she had discovered within herself, was something neither of them had ever anticipated. They were no longer just survivor and rescuer. They were partners, and together, they had triumphed. The quiet evenings spent on the ranch, watching Thunder graze or walking beside him in the fields, were reminders of how far they had come. The scars of the past may never fully fade, but they had both learned to live with them, forging ahead into the future with renewed hope. The threats and dangers were behind them, but the lessons they had learned would stay with them forever. For Emily, the true victory wasn't in the arrests or the downfall of the underground racing ring. It was in the peace she now shared with Thunder, and in the understanding that no matter the hardships, healing was always possible. And as the sun dipped below the horizon each night, Emily knew that the ranch had become more than just a place. It had become home. A home built on love, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and the horse who had changed her life. As the stars began to shine above the ranch, Emily looked toward the future, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, she and Thunder would face them together. Because the journey had just begun, and this time, they were ready. If you've been inspired by Emily and Thunder's journey, it's time to take action. Just like Emily, you can make a difference in the lives of animals who have been through unimaginable struggles. Whether it's adopting a rescue animal, supporting local shelters, or simply learning more about the realities of animal cruelty, every step you take counts. You have the power to give hope to those who need it most. Just like Thunder found a second chance, so can countless others. Join the movement, make a difference, and help create a world where every animal can experience love, trust, and the freedom they deserve. Don't wait. Become part of the change today. Share their story, spread the message, and take action. Because every animal deserves their moment of redemption.